All right, guys, welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today I'll be discussing the wide receiver market in the NFL, dishing out predictions on what will happen in terms of trades in free agency a couple weeks before the new league year begins. The top headlines in today's episode, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, projections on what will happen with them. T. Higgins, of course, looks like he's going to get franchise tagged by Cincinnati. Are they going to look to move him? Or are they going to look to pay him? That will be predicted here in this one. Free agency. Loaded with a lot of veteran mid-level options. What are going to happen with those guys? We'll discuss alongside Devontae Adams potentially becoming available from the New York Jets, and he should be on the open market as well. So plenty to discuss here today. Kicking things off with Cooper Kupp. This is a player that the Rams are looking to move on from. He doesn't want to leave, but unfortunately the business side of things is going to be taken over when it comes to Cooper Kupp. It appears, 2 years, $38.5 million remaining on his deal, and it just appears that Les Snead and the Rams are not going to want to pay him that much money compared to what they've been getting the last couple of seasons. His production back in 2021, 2,400 yards, 22 touchdowns. Since then, he's really struggled with injuries. He still had 95 plus targets, but health has been not optimal for him. He only had 2 drops this past season on 105 targets. 3 years, though, of 815 yards or less. Hasn't hit double-figure touchdowns since 21 either. So this is a guy who still commands a lot of targets. He's still, first one in, last one out type of mentality. Incredibly hard worker, phenomenal football IQ, route running. This is a player that still has a lot to bring to the table, even though it's been, tough sledding for him the past couple of seasons in terms of staying on the football field. And I think with these heavy cap numbers of $29.8 million in 25 and then 26, 27.3, they're looking to move on from the 32-year-old. I think he could still be a tremendous asset for numerous teams. The Rams aren't exactly starving for cap. They're 15th in the league in cap, about $40 million to work with. In Kupp, certainly, moving on would boost that number. So they're not exactly in cap hell by any means, but I think they're looking to, just move, forward into the future in a different direction. They did have some guys this past year step up a little bit. None that I'm really confident in taking over his production. It's going to have to be a collective group. Of course, Nakua is elite. Demarcus Robinson was really good this past season, though. Tutu Otwell as well. There's a solid little trio there. Of course, they're going to look to probably upgrade in the draft or free agency themselves. So moving on from Cooper Kupp's not going to be the biggest detriment for them, but with him going up in age and Matthew Stafford as well, doesn't have too many years left. We don't even know if he's going to be on the Rams this upcoming season. So Les Snead, they're looking to move on and into the future. Some of the top targets, though, the Patriots, the Bills, the Commanders, and Pittsburgh, potential trade compensation. I think a 4th and a 6th round pick next year would make the most sense. I think the Rams are probably going to have to eat a big portion of this cap number. They're probably going to have to throw in a draft pick of their own if they want it to be a little bit more balanced. But I think this will be all right for the Rams if this is a decision they decide to make. I think they should probably keep him at least one more year, but it'll be certainly probably more difficult to offload him next season if he underperforms. So a bit of a tricky situation. It's an unfortunate one. One of my favorite players in the league for sure, and a guy that's done so much since coming out of Eastern Washington, drafted back in 2017. It's been a phenomenal asset for this franchise, including that Super Bowl run a couple years back. Looking at what I think will happen with him, is the prediction. I think the Commanders, they're going to get aggressive and send a 3rd round pick for Cooper Kupp. This is a team that's coming off a phenomenal season. It was very surprising. Jane Daniels, of course, being Rookie of the Year by a wide margin, leading them to the conference championship game. That's a team that still has plenty of holes, and I think wide receivers are going to be looking for another playmaker, another one that can come match Terry McLaurin. So I think they're going to get aggressive here, send an early round draft pick. You hope it pans out if you're going to send that type of capital. But teams like Pittsburgh, the Bills, they're probably going to be in the hunt as well, so you're going to have to offer some good draft selections. I think a 3rd rounder, it's going to be a late one, of course, would get the needle moved for the Rams. Biggest problem is that the Commanders are in the NFC, so that's probably going to make them have to cough up a little bit more than they would like. So I think a third rounder makes a lot of sense here. Maybe like a 6th or a 7th round pick as well would get tossed in there. I could sense a potential bidding war, though, between some of these teams that could, use this addition in Kupp, because if he's healthy, and I think he could certainly still play at a high level. I think the Commanders would certainly enjoy having him. Moving to Deebo Samuel, this is a guy coming off a very disappointing season. reports are indicating he's not really in football shape at the moment. It kind of seemed like at times throughout last season he probably wasn't taking it as serious as he could, but he was very vocal throughout the year. Of course, he complained about not getting the football, and then literally the next game on a 3rd and long drops a wide open pass that would have been a first, and it was a very crucial game for them. So that just kind of shows the kind of player that he's kind of evolved into, and it's not been great. He certainly is downgraded coming off, I'd say the worst season of his career. In terms of numbers, it's the second worst. Back in 2020, didn't play very much though. So in terms of a full season, I know it was a tough year for the 49ers across the board. He had issues with health, at a time. I think it was the Kansas City game that got a little scary there for him. But, 670 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's pretty clear they're going to move on from him. $17 million, 1 year left on his deal. 49ers have over $30 million across 4 years in void years, so not really off the hook, and I think they'd certainly like to get some type of compensation. I think you're looking at a late 3rd, 4th round pick to get the job done here as well. Potentially even less, though, could be offered, to get rid of Deebo, to kind of push him out of here. But I know the money, they're certainly going to end up eating a lot, and it's not ideal for the 49ers. This is a guy that I think they expected to certainly still be a big part of this core. At wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall, he's kind of the future for them. Juwan Jennings are probably going to look to pay him some solid cash as well. So this is a team that has plenty of money to work with. Moving forward, though, it's not great because they're going to have to eat a lot here. Almost $14 million in 2026 for a guy that's not going to be on roster, and then 7+ over the next 2 years. So it's not ideal for them, what they've gotten themselves into with this Deebo Samuel contract. He's still only 29 years old, could certainly still bring a lot to the table, and I think that's what some of these teams they're going to be coveting. A guy that can be versatile, can be effective from the slot, can split him out wide where he spent most of his career, and he can be a nice runner for you too. I don't know how many other offenses would like to utilize him in that capacity, but that's something he's proven to be effective in, especially in the red zone at times throughout his career with San Francisco. This one's pretty much a guarantee that he's going to be out. The expectation is he will not be on the roster, and John Lynch is going to make a deal to shoot him off elsewhere. And I think, the top target's going to be some of the same guys. Baltimore, they will step in there. The Giants, I think they could be looking to add a guy, who's still relatively young that I think can certainly bolster their roster. New England and Pittsburgh. And I think the Steelers, they're going to send a 4th round pick to get the job done for Deebo Samuel. That's a team that certainly badly needs help. And, they're kind of desperate for playmakers, and I think Deebo trying to squeeze some juice out of him, maybe get him back to his old ways of being effective like he was in previous years for San Francisco. 1,000 yards just, a year ago in 2023. And of course, back in 2021, it was probably his best year of almost 1,600 yards. You're hoping you can get that level of production out of him, at least 1,000 yards. It's a big struggle for Pittsburgh right now. They need answers. They're really searching for them, so I think they're going to look to get this deal done. And, of course, they're going to still be aggressive in free agency and the draft. Deebo Samuel, though, right now is a player that's trending down, so you certainly don't want to get burned in that regard. But, the 49ers are probably going to end up having to pay most of this $17 million this season. So I think you could probably get a nice bargain for Deebo. I think the production will be pretty solid if you get him back in the right mentality. Hopefully a fresh start. And, of course, working Mike Tomlin might motivate him a little bit more. He can still be a very good player. He's still relatively young, coming off just a rough season. So wishing the best for Deebo Samuel, player that can still be effective. Now I move to free agency and some predictions. I got a slide here on the guys I think they will resign. And then the next slide will be guys that are going to be changing teams. So you're going to get, a full boatload here of what's going to happen in free agency according to my projections. T. Higgins, I think Cincinnati's ultimately going to end up re-signing him to a 4-year, $120 million deal. Cincinnati's kind of in a tough spot. And that's just the downside of drafting so well is that, Joe Burrow's major contract they've given him, Jamar Chase, he's going to be up next as well. And then T. Higgins getting a figure like this, you're looking at almost 50% of your cap being spread across 3 players. So this is going to be a tough challenge for the Bengals organization because this is a team that still is significantly bad on defense. That's why they were awful last year and they did not make the playoffs. It's because the defense just could not come alive, and there's certainly needs in that regard that they're going to have to address. So they're going to be in a bit of a tough situation. The good part is they'll be able to keep that big 3 trio alive. And I think that's the best fit for T. Higgins. I know, him and Trevor Lawrence potentially reuniting in Jacksonville would be on his radar as well. But he certainly has a great connection with Burrow. Him and Chase, this is probably the top 1-2 punch in the NFL. Last 2 years, the numbers have been a little bit low for him, battling injuries, but he's proven the ability to be a great number 2. 911 yards and 10 touchdowns playing second fiddle is not bad at all, still commanding 100-plus targets in 4 out of his 5 years so far. Week 17 against Denver, he showed you just how elite he can be with 131 and 3 touchdowns, and he does that periodically where he really brings a lot of tenacity, a guy that can give you 80 yards and 2 scores every single Sunday. So this is a guy you certainly want to keep around as a playmaker. When it comes to your chances of winning a ring, they're going to be significant if he's around. They don't really have many options either. Jermaine Burton being an incredible flop. Wide receiver would be very ugly looking if, outside of Chase, of course, if they do not bring him back. 8th right now in cap. So they got plenty of money to get the job done this year. $120 million across 4 years puts you at $30 million per season. Maybe that's a tad overpay. Maybe they'll do 110, 115. I think 120 is probably that magic number that he's probably going to be looking for. At 26 years old, is certainly one of the game's top receivers while being the number 2 option for Cincinnati. Chris Godwin, I wasn't sure if Tampa Bay would look to re-sign him. All signs are kind of pointing to that getting done. 2-year, $30 million, $15 per year. Seems to be an ideal way to go coming off a major leg injury, though. It's unfortunate for Godwin, especially in a career season. He's provided a lot for this team. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to part with him, though. He was having a pretty good season before he got hurt. Had 50-plus yards in every single game. Was on his way to having another 1,000-yard season with absolute ease. He had, 5 in a row before that. So this is a guy who's been great throughout his career. Almost 8,000 yards, 41 touchdowns for Tampa Bay. With Liam Cohen departing, last thing you want to do is, start to see weapons leave. Mike Evans is getting older. Godwin, he's been around a good bit as well, but he's really not that old in his own right, only 29. So I think if he comes back healthy, which is always, a 50-50 with leg injuries like that, I still think he can be a nice producer for Tampa Bay, and I don't think they expect him to leave and go anywhere. Amari Cooper, this is an interesting one for Buffalo. This is a guy that was great, elite with Joe Flacco 2 years ago for Cleveland, ends up getting traded for pretty solid capital, a third-round pick being involved. The back half of the year with Buffalo was really up and down. A couple of games were really impressive, a few touchdowns, and others were he just wasn't getting snaps, wasn't getting targets, and he had no problem playing his role. I don't think that's the biggest issue here. I think trying to find a nice figure that makes sense for both parties is what we're going to be looking for. And I think this guy still has a lot to offer coming into the midst of a playoff contender late in the year. Can certainly be challenging. He only had 2 games of 5+ targets, and one of those was his debut against Tennessee where he had a touchdown. And he had 95 yards against LA late in the year as well. So I think this is the player they're going to look to retain. There's nothing that suggests that Amari Cooper is falling off by any means. I know he had some problems with drops. 8 of them this past season. That's the most he's had in a long time. This guy's been doing it for a while, over 10,000 yards, 66 touchdowns. It's been a very good career for Amari Cooper. And I think this guy can still be effective for a team that needs help at wide receiver. He'll be 31 when the season gets going. All these ages on screen are when the season begins. 2 years, $26 million. I think 13 per season would make some sense. They still need guys in this receiving room, and I think he can be an asset, even if the production at the end of the year might not be substantial. I think this is a guy that's a great leader in the locker room. He's a reliable playmaker. And I think a full offseason to get acquainted in this offense will certainly pay dividends for both sides. So I'd like to see Buffalo retain Amari Cooper. Same with Stephon Diggs, another guy coming off a major leg injury with a torn ACL. I think re-signing with Houston's the only real option here, $20 million over a year. I think, it's a pretty substantial amount to pay, but this is a guy who can be a significant X factor. I know at times last year the offense kind of felt lifeless, didn't really have much of an identity at times. This is a guy who still commanded a good amount of targets. He had 62 towards about eight games there. So I think that Stephon Diggs returning to Houston is really the only option. And this is a guy who also, from 2017 to 2023, gave you 1,000-yard seasons. He was likely going to have another one here for the Texans. And, this is a playmaker that a lot of people were excited for when they acquired. I know he's moved around quite a bit as of late, from Minnesota to Buffalo, but he gave those teams a good 4 years, and I think for Houston, he could probably give them another good 3 as well. I think the injury certainly makes things tough, as it always does in a contract year. I think he'll still get well taken care of, though. This is a guy that certainly, with his versatility, would be great for this Texans offense with C.J. Stroud. They're still pretty good across the board with a new play caller in store after Bobby Slowick's departure. I think there's going to be a lot more excitement to get the weapons going. The offense was very quiet at times throughout the year, but the weapons are certainly there, and Diggs is one of them. He had a great season before he got hurt. Yeah, he only had 2 drops as well. So I think this is still a high-end performer, producer guy, and get you 1,400 yards, I think. Again, if he does come back healthy, which I anticipate he will, and you certainly hope that they do. You're looking at a couple of guys for Kansas City, DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown. For Hopkins, kind of like Cooper, right? This is a guy that showed up halfway through the season, had some good games, had some quiet ones. Even in his older age, though, he's a nice veteran. He's a guy that can make plays with good hands out wide, and I think it's kind of the boat Kansas City's in. Is I can't really afford to just depart here at wide receiver because it's still been a bit of an inconsistent group for them. Xavier Worthy, I know they're trying to, help him evolve into that top target alongside Rashee Rice when he comes back, who I think is going to be phenomenal for the Chiefs moving forward, coming back from a tough leg injury. Maybe this is overpaying DeAndre Hopkins a little bit, but I certainly think that his services would be covered in free agency if he were to get there, so I don't think they're going to look to take a discount here. I know he'll be, 33 when the season gets going, getting up there in age, but he had some good games for Kansas City. He had 2 touchdowns in his second game, that is against Tampa Bay. Ended up with 5 on the year for this ball club. Had one of those coming in the Super Bowl as well. The yardage totals certainly weren't all that great, but I think this is a player that can still come in and uplift this offense as an outside pass catcher, especially in the red zone. Maybe that's a little bit too much money for him. But again, I think other people would be willing to probably pay 10 a year for DeAndre Hopkins. Marquise Brown, it was a tough year for him. Got hurt in the preseason, didn't return until week 16. He had back-to-back 40-plus yard games. Got 6 targets in the Super Bowl. This is still a nice speed option. He's played a lot of his career out wide, but he also has some nice versatility to get in the slot and be used as a burner. Very young player, though. It's an unfortunate situation that happened with him because he didn't really have a chance to really evolve himself in this offense due to that preseason injury. So I think another, $5 million deal across one season, kind of another one of those prove-it deals, would make the most sense here for Hollywood Brown. I think he can be a great asset in this offense. We'll wait and see, though, once he's fully healthy. I fully anticipate both of these guys coming back for Kansas City. And then Noah Brown, he was kind of an unsung hero throughout the year for Washington. You certainly don't want to pay him too much, especially since my last projection had them acquiring Cooper Kupp. But this is a guy, he had 453 yards, caught 35 balls on 54 targets. I know his only touchdown was on that Hail Mary, but it seemed like this guy was a more, important focal point of the offense throughout the year than the numbers will reflect. I think he was starting to kind of build a nice rapport with Jayden Daniels late in the season as it went on, and of course he didn't play past week 13 due to injury. So I think he certainly would have had much better numbers. And, he's really come on the last 3 years. Didn't have any touchdowns over the first 4 of his career. And this would have been, his third straight 500-yard season with a third different team as well. So I think he's kind of found a bit of a home here in Washington. And I think he should be given an opportunity to remain. Only 29 years old. Came out of Ohio State as a 7th-round pick. Has really grinded out a bit of a nice journeyman career here. I think, $18 million over 3 years. That's respectable. I don't know if that's what they're going to end up giving him. But I think, again, with the rapport that he was building with Daniels and the momentum he had in this offense, it would be, kind of silly not to pay him $6 million a year to kind of see where it goes over the next 2. Maybe, have an easy out after before that 3rd year, an easy out for them that's, cap friendly. It would make the most sense. I'd like to see Brown return for Washington. Now moving to the free agency predictions in terms of team changers. Darius Slayton leaving the Giants. A guy that also has, inconsistent production, but is coming off, a 3rd straight 500-yard year. He had 8 touchdowns in his rookie season. He had at least 2 in every year since. I know playing in the Giants, this offense really wasn't too much to glamour and gloat about, but he had good games. A pair of 100-yard games this past season against Pittsburgh and Seattle. Obviously they had problems at quarterback his entire time there. It's been an issue. A young guy at 28 years old, a nice speed threat. I think can win downfield and be, a consistent, reliable performer. I think that for the Chargers, that's something they need. And I think that's where, a 3-year, $36 million deal will come in handy. I think Slayton's going to be an underrated, coveted guy. I think in an offense with a really good quarterback, one that can scheme him up, occasionally to be open, and be a consistent target. I think he can be a nice impact performer, so I think that's going to be a nice deal from him. Maybe someone looks to give him, more money on a 1-year type deal to see if it works. I think 12 per season. The Chargers, they need some help, and I think that'd be a great way to move forward with Slayton, a very underrated player that probably doesn't get enough love, doesn't get talked about a whole lot. Playing for the Giants, of course, that's hard to do. He did have a bad problem with drops this past season. with 7 of them. But I think this is a guy who can be a good, consistent performer on Sundays for you. So I expect him to get a good deal of money. Maybe the production doesn't exactly reflect it, but again, the offense he was working out of kind of limited his abilities in that regard. Next up on this list, Keenan Allen. What is he going to do? Doesn't really seem very keen on playing for the Bears. Statistically, it was one of his worst seasons playing with a rookie quarterback and an offense that struggled significantly at times to manufacture. But I think this is still a player that a lot of veterans would like to have. I remember his time at the Chargers. He was, target warrior. I mean, he was so fun to use in fantasy on a weekly basis because he got so many looks for a long time for the Chargers this past year. He showed the ability to still be a playmaker. 744, 7 touchdowns, still at 100-plus targets, even a bit in his bit of an older age. He'll be 33 when the year starts. This is still a really good player. I love his utilization out of the slot, and I think he wants to play for a good contender to kind of maybe ring chase here. Not do it in a disrespectful manner by any means. Like we're just going to go bolt to the Chiefs for a cheap contract. I think going to play for the 49ers. He went to college at Cal there in Northern California. So going kind of back to where his college roots were. I know that was a long time ago, but he understands the area, and I think it might be kind of glamorous for him. 2-year, $25 million deal, respectable pay for both sides. And the 49ers get, a bit of an improvement there in the slot for what's going to be kind of a robust wide receiver room in terms of movement. You're going to see all kinds of different options, I think, for San Francisco become available. John Lynch, I think, is going to make some big-time improvements there, and Allen will be a great veteran for what I anticipate will also feature a lot of young guys as well. Deontay Johnson, what a saga he had this past year. It didn't seem like he really cared to play football, which is crazy because, he was a pretty solid performer not too long ago, and now he's kind of be on the back burner when it comes to options. Had really good seasons with Pittsburgh to start his career. This past season, he was on 3 different teams, ended up on Baltimore twice. I don't know. Deontay Johnson was kind of a mess this past year. Does he even want to play football? What's his motivation at this point? Really not sure. Seems like he has a lot of maturity issues. He doesn't know how to handle them. And he's still a young cat. He'll be 29 here soon. I think someone's going to look to try to sign him to a cheap deal because this is a talented player. You can get a nice bargain for him if he does show up and he wants to put in the work and the prep to earn targets and be on the field and be a part of a winning team. Las Vegas, they're not going to be a winning team, but I think a 4-year deal from the Raiders is going to be the option here. I don't think too many contenders are going to look to put him, on roster when that roster spot could go to somebody else that, you probably don't have to question their morals and their integrity when it comes to wanting to play the game. So Johnson, $4 million from Vegas, and I think Mike Williams, $6 million deal to go to Baltimore to kind of be a red zone option, third down target with his hands and his size. It's also kind of a guy who's kind of fallen off as age has gotten to him, but I think he can still be a respectable performer on occasion for you. And the Ravens, they still need some help in those regards. Guys that can, be available in the red zone and available on third down with those qualities I discussed. And of course, Devontae Adams, I teased it at the beginning. I made a Jets episode a week or two ago where I said that you'd get cut. They save a lot of money by getting rid of him. It's close to $30 million, I believe the Jets would free up by releasing him at the age of 33. So it seems like that's going to be the option. He is starting to get older in age, but I think he's certainly going to be worth every penny you pay him, and I think the Chargers are going to look to do that. Pair Justin Herbert up with some better options at pass catcher alongside Ladd McConkey. Of course, Quentin Johnson has been a phenomenally bad disappointment for them. They're not going to look to pay him too much money, and he returns to the area he started in at college when he was at Fresno State. Adams has kind of been a bit of a diva at times, it seems, over the last couple of years. Wanted out of Green Bay to go play with Derek Carr. That didn't work out. And as soon as they ditched Carr, he wanted to go play with Aaron Rodgers again. And now, the Jets are probably going to be entering a bit of a rebuild phase, at least for its offense. And now they have questions at quarterback. He wants to go elsewhere. So it seems almost certain he'll be hitting free agency, and I think the Chargers would make the most sense. He'd be a great fit for him. I think the 49ers would also look to covet his services. I still think this is a guy that can give you some good production. He's one of the game's elite pass catchers. So I think the Chargers would make a lot of sense for him. That's going to conclude today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.